with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
Hey, what's up, world?
Yeah,
Welcome to episode 83 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. This is Black Liberation Media. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon, put the link in the show, in the socials. Renee.
you just got so much in just now in like 30 seconds.
Hey, because I'm about to be quiet for the next 2 hours once this thing is started. So
listen.
Make my contributions early.
I hear you. I'm very excited actually for Jared to join. He sent a note. He'll be here in about 15 minutes. So that'll give us some time to run through some other stuff, because there's always other stuff.
Absolutely. So yeah, what?
So on the run sheet, which don't feel bad, I literally put these on there like 30 minutes ago, so there's no shot you saw them. No shot.
Can I do a quick promo as folks are coming in? I want to just invite people to, as they are liking, sharing, subscribing. Oh, I do have to stop that. And getting themselves settled. Just I want to put in the first reminder or note in the air that on May 14th at 2 p.m. live on Black Liberation Media Patreon, the review crew is going to gather finally to properly judge the sinners. So if you are not a patron, this is a great time to sign up. If you are, just put this in your mind grapes and calendar, and be prepared to join us live for the full review crew, plus with special guests, extended review crew, discussion of sinners. So May 14th, 2:00, Patreon, Black Liberation Media, links in the show description.
I'm actually really looking forward to that conversation.
Me too.
I really am. I'm really looking forward to that conversation, because as Intume has said multiple times, and I actually think Geechee said the same thing at some point, the discourse on that movie, whew, it's something. I mean, I don't really know.
It exists.
I don't really know what to call it, but it's definitely something.
Yeah, it's. I think. I do think that this will be a unique contribution, this discussion, and one that is definitely needed.
I agree.
So I agree. Just again, May 14th, 2:00 p.m. Eastern time. If you can make it, please do, and we'll see you then. Yeah. All right. So I got the run sheet pulled up.
Okay. So first things first, I have a new book review out, which you read.
I did.
It also got the thumbs up from Two Black, so I figure I did everything that I needed to do.
So over here,
some side notes from other folks, just saying I did a good job. So this is the new book review up on Public Square Amplified. Shout out to Josie, who might be listening in her car. We'll see.
Shout out to Josie. Peace.
But I've taken on this like venture of writing these book reviews on books that I just feel like are worth telling people you need to read these. And so, the first one was Tip of the Spear, and then I've now followed up with Laundering Black Rage, which I can't really say enough how much For such a short book, because I think I forgot how short the book was.
That's true.
It
Yeah,
is
it's not.
just jam packed with information for such a short book, and so I really wanted to do a review on it, and so that is now available on Public Square.
And the link is now in the show description.
Thank
So
you
if
very much.
folks want to
Thank you
check it
very
out.
much. And I will just add that if folks can sign up for at least, to get our little newsletters from Public Square, that would help me. And Josie can stop yelling at me for not talking about it enough.
Very important.
To say so myself, the review is pretty good, and quotes.
I think you're breaking up there just a little bit. Breaking up. Say that part again. I think you're breaking up just a little bit. And Two Black shout out is in the chat. Thank you for writing this, Renee.
Man, thank you for the book. All I did was pull some quotes and give some commentary. The book does it all. The book does it all. So the next review, because I just got confirmation back from the author this morning that they were down, is going to be on Sky Full of Elephants.
Oh, word. Okay.
Yes, which I'm very excited about.
Shout out to Sibo
and
Campbell.
Sibo has shout out. And so he has extended and told me to let you know that he's going to be doing something in the fall in DC, and he will keep us posted so that we can
right on.
So we can join in and
maybe
and be down
we should
there. Hopefully,
maybe and then. No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, finish.
Well, I was just gonna say maybe we can all link up and go to the show, go to the go and and as the show says, and salute to them, take me out to the go. We'll take him out to the go.
So I will admit, and you're not going to be happy with me when I finish this sentence.
No.
I'm just warning you.
All right.
So, I lived down there for like 10 years, and I never quite immersed myself in the go-go thing. So.
No, I'm not mad. For DC is a very transient city, and for those who and for a lot of people who are not native to the city or to the area, spending time there or showing up late even and staying there for the rest of their lives does not automatically mean it is something that is one of those things. I think, it's you're born in it and of it. Some do acquire it late, but others. So I'm not mad at that. I get it. It's unfortunate. If anything, I feel sorry for you a little bit because it's such it's such a remarkable, experience and community. So
I got yelled at a lot while I was down there. I mean, I was, it wasn't a short stint. I was down there like 12 years. So it's not, it wasn't a short amount of time, but I just couldn't really get into it. But it's all good. It's all good.
It's all good.
I'm gonna post if we choose to do the go-go thing and we can make this happen. I'm not gonna be like, oh, I ain't going to that. But just know I might not be as excited while we're there.
I would love to see a before and after. Because if we catch the right spot in the right show, which would probably be the only way I would want to be there anyway, I would like very much to see the very next Saturdays with Renee and see how you felt. Because I sometimes once you get in there, it's the. But we'll see. And like I said, not everybody, not everything is for everybody. It's all
right,
good.
Right. And I would
like to think I would like to crank a little bit.
We'll see.
We crank it.
Oh man.
Stone chowder, put me in the water. Anyway.
um so so I see Jared popped up. So we haven't quite gotten to Ras Baraka, and I just want to talk about Ras Baraka just for a few minutes because I can't. So Jared,
Right.
give the thumbs up if you want to talk about Ras Baraka, or if you want to hang out until we finish talking about Ras Baraka. So J Dub, just let us know which one you want to do, because it's
maybe I'm not sure. Is he hearing?
Oh, maybe not. I don't know.
Or is he frozen?
I don't know.
No, I saw him blink.
He blinked.
He
I don't
blinked.
know. Maybe I'm driving. I'm gonna be driving for about the next 30 minutes, and then I'll be sitting somewhere in the car waiting. My child's going to a birthday party. This is the story of my life. But so you know what? If he catches this at some point, you could just pull him in whenever, because this is not going to take long. So the other link before, outside of all the stuff with Harvard and all this madness that's going on, is about Ras Baraka getting quote unquote arrested yesterday outside of the ICE facility at Delaney Hall. Mm-hmm. So I picked this AP article on purpose. It was intentional because obviously the AP is national news. So that means that it has hit, the big stage now that Ras Baraka got arrested. It's not a very long article, but here's what I want people to understand. And y'all all know I do not like Ras Baraka, right? I am not a fan. I'm not a Democrat anyway, so I can't vote in the primary, but even if I could, I would not be voting for him. So to me, and look, this is just me. I have no documentable evidence to confirm this, right? This is a PR stunt. And Ras Baraka's PR team is phenomenal. I will give them credit, because this man just found his way onto a national stage for some shit that, like, no lie, is PR. So first of all, he was there at the facility for like a long time before this quote unquote arrest happened, right? When he got arrested, they took him to a facility in Newark. Now, Ras Baraka and the Newark police are buds. These are his people, right? So I want y'all to understand that Ras Baraka being detained anywhere in Newark is not the detention that the 14-year-olds who end up being charged as adults. That is not the same treatment, okay? Second of all, now he gets to be on a national stage where he can, claim that he's trying to fight for whatever. Now he's suing about Delaney Hall. We've already covered the tens of thousands of people that ICE picked up in Newark during Biden's administration, for which no one in Ras Baraka's administration seemed to have any issue with. Now, all of a sudden, they have issue. When ICE announced that they were going to open this facility, Ras Baraka did an interview on PBS where he basically said, I mean, if they get the permits, there's not really anything else we can do, right? He wasn't pressed, right? He said the same thing when he showed up at a rally that was being held in front of the facility before it opened. So someone who made very, very little effort to prevent this thing from opening is now about to hugely get rewarded for an action that he's taking after the facility opened, just so he could be like, look, I fought, look at what I did. It's all bullshit. Y'all, the man's running for governor. I don't even know if he really wants to be a governor, but look, that's what he's claiming. And now he gets to be on the national stage to pretend like he did something. Like, yeah, I just can't. Like, I just, if ICE had picked him up and then we got a note that he was in Louisiana, I'd be less inclined to think it was bullshit. But he just went down the street, and then the people came out. There was hundreds of people in the street in Newark. Free Ross Baraka. Where the hell were all them people when they were opening this facility? Right? Like, y'all, I just can't. I can't with the PR stunt. I just can't. I just can't take it seriously. So.
Wow. That's, I mean, if you, well, like you said, you don't have there is some speculation here, but the point is there's no track record of him working steadfastly against what was being developed, as you said, down the street. And look, I watched all, I think, 8 seasons of Veep, which I think therefore makes me an expert on all things American politics. And they would have definitely done that in Veep. So therefore,
it is a
ergo,
great PR stunt, yo. This is brilliance. It's brilliance because after doing absolutely nothing for 4 years under Biden to support the immigrant community, and then literally throwing up his hands and like, oh, what can we do in response to the announcement? And then on Monday, he announced that they're suing, this private facility for opening the detention center. Like, you waited until after it opened to sue. Where was all the effort to prevent them from doing, like, I just can't. I can't, man. I just can't. I don't have it in me to like be excited about dumb shit, and this is just dumb. But
I
it's
mean,
a
the other
great stunt.
yeah, and just for sort of like a media studies 101 type of lesson, this would be perfect for a class like that, to examine what folks really know. As I did ask again at the end of my semester just this week, how do you know what you know, and why do you like what you like?
Questions of the day. Questions of the
And
day.
gotta have, and Warren, it might be just 6 seasons. I don't know. I was just trying to make some sort of contribution. Just give Renee a chance to catch her breath, because I what am I going to say other than, I mean, might could be.
Yeah, it's just exhausting. But I will say that folks have been coming out, so they've been going out to Delaney at like 6 a.m. every day since the facility opened to just be out there and be a presence and complain, which I'm all for. At 6 a.m. I'm making breakfast so I can drive the kids to school, so I can't join. But it's the people, there've been people consistently speaking out against this. What I foresee is it becoming all about like this thing with Ross Baraka, and like in all the commentaries I saw, the posts, all the things, no one talks about like the actual facility and the harm that these, like, they're prisons, right? Like, no one's talking about that stuff. But now we're going to talk about Ross Baraka and his fake arrest, you know, and then now he's like, he did some interview with CNN, of course, and he's like trying to check the U.S. attorney. But if you go back like maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, he invited her to Newark. This was his homegirl, right? He wanted her to come to Newark and to see what Newark was really about. So like, I can't take this seriously. I just can't. I can't do it.
No, but I mean, we live in an era, and I'll use this as a segue, given something that was discussed recently, but in a way to bring our guest on. But we live in a moment where Hakeem Jeffries is the progressive voice of the quote unquote movement. and some big time academic scholars of Fanon support Zionist genocide. So, like, why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
We straight
And
up
with
living in the
that,
upside down, y'all.
but making things right side up, Jared Ware.
Whoop whoop.
And I'm going to say phrasing just in case.
Thanks for bringing me on. I hope my connection will hold up all right. I'm in a hotel, obviously, so the Wi-Fi may be a little bit funky, but just let me know.
So far, so good.
All good. I'm really excited that we got this to happen so quickly, given me sending random text messages in the middle of the day. and then coming up with random ideas over email. On the offside, that there is some random person watching right now who's never seen you, which, if that is the case, you should be ashamed of yourself for not knowing who Jared Ware is. But could you do a quick who you are so that we have it on the record that we didn't just go in and start talking to you without telling folks who you are? Oh.
Yeah.
Do we have a delay? Maybe there's a delay.
It sounds like there's.
I think there's a little bit of a delay. Sorry about that. Let me know if there's any issues with on my end. But thanks for having me on. I mean, so I host the Millennials Are Killing Capitalism live stream. It does sound like there's a delay. All right. I wonder what I could do about that. Unfortunately, I'm on this hotel Wi-Fi, and I don't think it's very good. So anyways, I'm the host of the Millennials Are Killing Capitalism live streams, co-host of the Millennials Are Killing Capitalism podcast, along with Joshua Briand. We do a lot of anti-imperialist programming. That's kind of our lane, and certainly have done a lot on Palestine, and recently we've been doing some stuff on India and Kashmir and Pakistan as well. But we've done a whole bunch of different things over the years, but it's always through that vein of kind of anti-imperialist politics, with also an emphasis on revolutionary politics, socialism, communism, and anarchism as well.
Thank you.
Agreed.
I have meetings every Friday at 10:30. This is also Josie's fault. So I almost was late to my meeting because I was so engrossed in the conversation yesterday. But I still have to go back and finish listening to it because I started reading them damn reports, and so I just haven't had time to go back and listen to it yet. But if you are not subscribed to Millennials and Killing Capitalism, I think you should just take a second and open up another tab and just go ahead and take care of that right now so that it's done. And then you can you can hit the bell and know when stuff is coming. And I personally am a subscriber to the Patreon, and I also, so I support financially as well, which I also highly recommend folks do. But I just, I really appreciate the work that you all put in. And I'm super happy that we got today to work out. So thank you for joining. So what I did in my email when I finally figured out something to do, there had been a couple of articles that were released about these two reports that Harvard's president had commissioned. One was a focus on anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, anti-Zionism, yada yada. And then once it appears that once that commission started, that group started writing their report, they determined that there needed to be another report that was going to focus on Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestine, although Palestine is not in the title of the report. But that is a big focus of who they spoke to. So the New York Times.
My bad. I think it is actually.
Is
Am I
it?
looking at the wrong one? The
No, you might
Presidential
not be.
Task Force on Combating Anti-Muslim, Anti-Arab, and Anti-Palestinian
Oh,
Bias.
correction. Because in the report, there's someone mentions actually in the report that the name Palestine should be in the title. So maybe they changed it based on
They probably that would
they
make
probably
sense.
changed it. So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
so just a little bit of, I think, context for these is that these come out of, student complaint processes, right? So I think Title 6. So anytime a student experiences an incident of racism, essentially, they can report it, and there has to be some sort of investigation. And basically, post October 7th, uh, you had what I would say. Yeah, I mean, this is so difficult to talk about, honestly, because of the way that, I mean, these reports are hard to read, in a lot of ways, but those processes were used heavily by Zionists. Also, there's anti-Semitic, incidents that are involved, and then also used heavily by, Palestinian, Arab, Muslim students. And in some ways, it became also, I think, there's kind of, I think, a flooding that happened. I feel like students were encouraged to report what they felt was anti-Semitism, right? And so then there's kind of a flooding of that process, and then there's also then a kind of a counter encouragement to do something similar, for anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, and anti-Palestinian bias. But I'm sure we'll get into the characterizations of the reports. It was much harder to read. I felt like the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian one, just because of the sheer nature of what they are dealing with, is so much more difficult to kind of fathom and deal with than what we're talking about on the anti-Semitism side, which is, a lot of it is about feeling socially ostracized,
Right.
essentially, but
Right.
not actually about, like, having family members killed and, being worried about genocide. Or, at one point there's a incident where they say, a Muslim either student or person was chased with a knife on campus. I mean, so the nature and the scale of what's going on in the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian bias is, like, so much more heightened. But there's no there's no way that they kind of, the reports, even though they say they kind of were in tandem, they really don't speak to each other at all. There's
Right.
no real attempt to kind of cross contextualize what's going on.
Right. Right. Is it? And I agree. They were very difficult to read. I think I have so many thoughts. I but I don't want to talk too much. So, but I wanted to just set the baseline so that folks understood, like, this was where the conversation started from, was me tracking down these two reports after reading a New York Times article, which very loosely, like, explained that after they did these two projects, these two researching amongst the student body and the faculty and the staff, it was very, very clear that the Muslim, Arab, pro-Palestinian students it was like 3 times the amount felt unsafe on that campus versus the students who identified as Jewish. And so, given how the media response has been over these past 2 years almost, right? Like, I was actually a little surprised that the New York Times admitted that that was in the report. And then The Intercept released an article that was kind of a review of the New York Times report, which I thought was like an odd way to kind of go about it. And then I found the two reports because I just felt like going by the New York Times is never a good idea. And then The Intercept seemed to only really want to report on what the New York Times said, which I thought was weird. And so once I was able to track down where the two reports are, and they're publicly accessible. I didn't have to do a whole lot of work to find them, but I did share them with the Jareds and say like we can kind of start the conversation here. But I feel like there's a lot about these reports that wrap into like how media responds to these things and the things that media covers versus doesn't cover. I am curious about like what Harvard is going to do with these reports, because given its behavior thus far, I'm not, I have no hope that, and similar to what a lot of the students said, I have no hope that anything significant is going to change. But I am curious if that's a possibility, that type of thing. But Jared, I know Jared Jared, I know you mentioned a clip that you wanted us to play. So I don't know, should we start with that before we go into any conversation? Was there something else you wanted to add, Ball, if there's something you wanted to add?
It's a good one. It's a good one to play. So, we could play it. The only thing, oh, sorry. I feel like I'm sorry. I know there's a delay going on. I apologize. But I just say that the only thing I would add, I think we should play the clip, but the only thing I would add is that, Dylan Rodriguez, when he talks about counterinsurgency, one of the things that he says is that one of the key tactics of counterinsurgency is to waste our time. And thinking about these task force reports, like I couldn't help but think about like how much time went into writing 600 pages of, history, findings, conclusions, recommendations. Some of the recommendations I actually agree with. I mean, I think that, like, for instance, the anti-Palestinian bias one, the one that ends with that, recommends divestment from the state of Israel and from weapons manufacturers, because it's like that's what everybody is asking for, and I think that's one of the basic things in this is you could say, okay, there is this really unhealthy kind of atmosphere going on college campus right now. I mean, that's kind of, I do feel that you could kind of see that in the report, but what's the reason, right? Like we're talking about a genocide going on, and a bunch of people are impacted by that directly. And then you have students, and this was an interesting thing, is like Harvard in this report admits that more students at this point in time than any point in their history are either Israeli or have family members who are Israeli or have close connections to Israel, right? And it's saying that even, among the Jewish population. So it's saying, look, like and a lot of it is this thing of like an Israeli student tells somebody they're Israeli and then other students don't want to talk to them, or that's the perception that they get. It's not even that they said like anti-Semitic things to them typically. It's just like, I don't feel comfortable being around you right now, right? And I understand, I can empathize on a human level of like how that must feel. But at the same time, you have to compare it to like, other genocides in history. Like, I mean, how it's difficult to talk about this, right? But like, it's kind of, I think, a natural thing for students to be a little bit uncomfortable about that right now, especially when you're talking about a society where like everybody is conscripted into the military, and so what is going on, what they are seeing in terms of the violence against their families and their friends and their loved ones or people like them, seeing it on their phones all the time, that they're encountering people who have either participated in this military or will participate in this military. And even what about the data about Israeli society is how many of them actually support these operations too, right? Or have supported them. So I just think there's like, that's a key point of context that they sort of allude to, but don't really deal with. That the best thing that Harvard could actually do, or any college could do in this moment, would be to actually take steps to distance themselves from the violence, so that at least they could say, look, we've done these things so that, we're not complicit in what's going on. And that, I think, would actually take heat off of the Jewish students more broadly, because it, you know, it isn't fair that it just sits all like that, you know, but at the same time, like, you know, the, I don't know, like weighing these two reports, it's just like, it's, you know, it's kind of a natural thing to do. It's like one is really about uncomfortable, being uncomfortable and having a less than ideal college experience on the one hand, a social kind of ostracism maybe on the most extreme, and on the other side, people just like, our family members are dying and the Harvard president like doesn't care at all, you know, and there's no steps from administration to even acknowledge our pain. Like it's wild.
Yeah, just to add, if I can, just quickly, the to what Jared is saying, the false equivalence is crazy. So the links to both reports are in the show description. I didn't make it past the executive summary of either one of them, but just even in that much alone, again, the false equivalence is ridiculous. The and to Jared's point, I can't remember if it's from the report or something that I clicked on a slight rabbit trail that, to look at, but uh, since the 1960s, Harvard has had this after its initial bout with its own anti-Semitism, its refusal to admit Jews and all this other stuff. From the 60s on, it just had this flourishing. I'll put together that I don't think it's a coincidence that you have the 1967 invasions and expropriations and further colonial expansion of Israel and all of that, and that changed the relationship of the United States with Israel. That was a turning point, and so you get and you have not just more Jews coming onto the campus, but an increase of Harvard as an institution supporting the state of Israel, to the point that you're getting at militarily to support the Zionist project, as Harvard would be want to do, given all of its other relationships with MK Ultra, other state support. I mean, it's a state supported. It is the state. So this idea that all of a sudden we're going to now produce two reports, and it doesn't even matter what they say, with all due respect, it doesn't matter what they say. The equivalence is already, the imbalance is ridiculous. Harvard is literally militarily, financially, intellectually ensconced with the Zionist state project. And during that 60s, post 60s moment, sorry, Renee, I'll just,
No, you're good.
it's just, is that there was not a parallel, certainly maybe somewhat relative, you know, but not equivalent rise of Palestinian students. They talk about since the 2010s, there was this turning point where all of a sudden, now it's a new environment at Harvard, which also speaks to the point I wanted to raise, that from the 60s on, according to your own report, you're saying that it was known to certain elements in leadership at Harvard that there was a turning point where anti-Israeli bias was increasing, and so on and so on. So to then put it all on October 7th, and then put it all on these new Palestinian protesters, and then say we now need this, it's contradicting its own argument as I was reading it. And then just again, lastly, the false equivalence with the military relationship. You are literally supporting the Zionist project militarily. So the idea that you're going to produce some report that allows for some recognition of the very real differences that Jared already pointed to in terms of the contents of the experiences reported, and that this is supposed to be some sort of balancing act. The very last thing I want to say, sorry, is that when they're talking about, I didn't get to the point to really look at the methodology, but when they're claiming to be interviewing Jews and certain percentages are saying we felt upset in some way, one, they were clear to separate but also equate anti-Israeli bias with anti-Semitism. They just flat out say it. It is that. And then I'm like, well, how exactly are you saying, to what extent? So if someone just walks outside and sees a Palestinian flag, does that count as being oppressed? Does that, does someone have to actually say something to you? Does somebody have to, and then you read the Palestinian side of people, and it's anyway. So that's, I'll just stop there. I just thought that. Yeah.
But I just want to add that also the actual experiences on campus are very, very different for these students, right? Like, and I want us to watch the video, but both Jared's are absolutely correct. You have on one side like this absolute disregard for the real situation that is happening in Palestine right now, which is at the base of all the things that are happening in this moment and historically, right? Like we're 100 years in now on this, right? And then you're also really, you can't argue that if you are financially supporting and supported by anything that allows the state of Israel to participate in the genocide, it's pretty hard to like just act like you're not part of that. But on the other side, you have these two very different experiences for the students on campus. So what Jared Ware said about like, the ostracizing and the feeling uncomfortable, like that is what the majority of students were talking about. Like, they hear these screams for, these chants and they're so uncomfortable by the chants. I'm like, but yet you have students whose faces are on the sides of trucks parked on with their phone numbers, right? It is amazing to me that we are, because that was part of what the differential between these two reports that bothered me sincerely was this idea that like, so we're okay with the physical doxing of students. We're okay with the actual like physical harm that was done to students. We're okay with all of those things, but we're not okay with the student feeling uncomfortable because someone doesn't want to talk to them because they feel like their family's actions are participating in the death of their, like, it's crazy to me that we're even participating in this nonsensical discussion about what is real harm and what is real trauma, right? And maybe that's an unfair, biased thing to say, whatever, right? But if you tell me that you want me to look at who is really suffering real harm, is it the kid who feels uncomfortable because some kids don't want to talk to them, or is it the kid whose face is on the side of a truck whose family is being killed on the other side of the world? Like, I just can't see a comparison between those two things that's reasonable enough for me to think like this is an okay comparison to make. So
I'll pull the video up now.
pull it up.
But they literally quote a woman in the anti-Semitism report saying her hearing people, she's literally quoted as saying something, saying condemning the genocide in Gaza is anti-Semitism. So she's even recognizing linguistically, maybe by accident, and saying, but calling for it to end is not acceptable. So I mean, yeah. All right. Here we go. Do you want to set it up at all? I did happen to see this interview with Stephen Salaita. It's great. The link is in the show description to see the whole video.
Yeah. So I'll just say quickly that what I asked him was basically, I asked him to talk about the issue of Palestinians, right, having to focus, and this comes through in the report actually, because the report, the one thing I will give a lot of credit to on the anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli bias report is that it actually lays out a pretty interesting, like 40-50 year history of how the so-called Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right, has gone on campus, and the types of speakers that have been brought to campus, the dialogue initiatives, the debates, the the ways that different flashpoints, whether the first intifada, the second intifada, 67, 73, the 80s, how things, what the climate was like on campus, what protest was like on campus, who was coming, and et cetera, right? So I think it actually does a pretty good job of that. But what Stephen's about to say, I think, actually relates to a lot of that, which is that throughout that history, Palestinians were always kind of put in this position where they had to always hear the other side of the argument. They had to kind of legitimize the viewpoints of the people who are in this settler colonial state that is ongoingly displacing them from their lands and so on. And so he's going to talk a little bit about what it has meant in the pro-Palestine movement to have to always kind of do a lot of work to prove that you're not anti-Semitic, right? That your arguments are not based in anti-Semitism, and the sort of cost of that from his perspective.
Let's think about, if we want to do kind of a survey, right? A broad survey of the state of discourse / conversation in the Palestine solidarity community over the past 30, 40 years. And this corresponds when I became familiar with it and started participating in it. There was always a central question, what is anti-Semitism, and in what ways, is criticizing Israel potentially anti-Semitic, on and on and on. I mean, those questions were always front and center, right? And I think the fact that some people, I don't have empirical stats, but some people insist on keeping that question at the front and center while there's a genocide, occurring with perpetrators who are very proudly claiming their Jewish identity, right? And simultaneously, right, while the pretext of anti-Semitism, right, is being used to disappear students, to drag people off the street away from their families, imprison them, where it's been used to kill children. A Palestinian child last year, the year before, Haram, while it's being used to call in the cops to beat the shit out of students and drag them into prison, on and on and on. All of these things are happening, and the main pretext, not the only pretext, but the main pretext is safety and security for the Jewish people. Right? So what I'm trying to say is this. The fact that you would want to make identifying instances of anti-Semitism your priority. I'm not talking about the anti-Semitism itself. I'm talking about the prioritization of anti-Semitism amid these conditions tells me, right, that one of the unfortunate fallouts of the Palestine solidarity community spending so much time on the question of anti-Semitism over the years, right, it means that we didn't spend nearly enough time, and still aren't spending nearly enough time, exploring the racism inherent to Zionism. Because that question did not come up much, right? So is this anti-Semitic? Is that anti-Semitic? Is the other anti-Semitic? Okay, these are all good questions, but where were the discussions? Outside of a few scattered people, and then among Palestinians themselves, right? Usually out of sight of the camera because of all the shit that we were going to catch, right? Like, I don't think people understand the extent of harm, right, that we've suffered because of this narrative. Right? Just the firings, the arrests, either the police brutality, the physical. Man, you just don't like. So when we hear somebody bring that up, you have to understand, like, that there's a very real trauma response. Like, what the fuck is this shit? saw a bunch of images of dead children. Look, man, I don't have the headspace to think about this shit right now, especially since my life got fucked because of this false accusation, and continues to be because of this false accusation. That's the experience so many people have, right? So anyhow, but why weren't we discussing all this time, about the racism inherent to liberal Zionism? Why were they just assumed that they could be part of our community? Right? Why weren't we exploring whether the question of whether Zionists should be allowed into our organizing spaces in the first place? Why was that question off limits and off the table? In other words, why weren't we, the Palestinian, the native, the indigene, right? Why were we so rarely the subject of the question of racism? Right? And look at the disparities of power. We've been spending a lot of time talking about, Zionism as a form of racism, right? Well, what legislation are we passing? What politicians are listening to us? Which police force is being deployed on our behalf, right? Which students are getting dragged away and arrested and thrown into ICE hell and being deported because we feel like they're racist against us. Yeah. But they're doing it, right? Because students are saying, they're anti-Semitic. You have to keep this disparity of power in mind when you keep bringing up the term and the concept. We don't have power. Even if some attitudes you encounter you feel are objectively anti-Semitic, there is absolutely no power to act on that attitude. None. Ain't no police marching for us, right? But there are police marching for you. You have to be aware of that. That's what I'm trying to talk about, right? There was a huge mistake, right? That the Palestinian, that the native, the indigene, the colonized, right, was not the primary subject of conversations around racism, and now we're seeing the result of that, and the result has been tremendously ugly.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
Right. Like,
Kind of just sums it all up, right?
it really does. And it makes me think of, like, in the report, people who, in the anti-Semitism report, people saying that, they felt forced to, like, either say whether they were with or without, whether they were with or against Israel. And all I could think to myself was,
And to hide their identity.
right. But also, like, how many times did we hear, do you condemn Hamas? Like, I mean, that was the, you couldn't say anything unless you answered that question first. Right. And
some people even had their jobs threatened for wearing hijabs. I mean, and keffiyehs, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, to me, it just feels, it felt like just the wrong things were on the balance, right? Like, you had two totally unrelated experiences, although at the core of it, yes, it's the same current issue, right? It's not the same historical issue. Although I think people confuse that also by just saying, oh, well, like, I think there's so much that's missing in the general discourse, but I can't say enough how bothered I am that these two reports were so significantly different in the actual harm that was being caused versus the perceived harm that was being caused. And that was the thing that, for me, like, it just made it so, reading that. And I read the anti-Semitism one first on purpose because I didn't want to go into it with with the knowledge from the other one. So I intentionally read the anti-Semitism one first. And the whole time I was like, I just feel like all these people are mad because people aren't kissing their ass because they don't like genocide. And I like, for me, like, I can't, I can't be on board with that. I really don't care if you're uncomfortable because people are telling you they don't like genocide. Like that's the least of my problem.
Yeah, one of the things I would say too that's important to these reports is two wildly different understandings of the Palestinian condition of Gaza and of October 7th, right? And so on the one hand, you know, there's what I would say is like there's still such a lack of information or informal investigation into October 7th. You know, I mean, I think Electronic Intifada is one of the only outlets in the English language that has really even reported on a lot of the stuff that Israeli press has been saying in terms of events that occurred on October 7th. And what I mean by that to some extent is like in the anti-Semitism report, it's still using numbers, for instance, in the number of people who were killed on October 7th that are not factually correct, you know, and I don't want to get into like any sort of like denialism or anything like that, but it's quite clear that there is not any attempt there has not been any, first of all, like non-partisan outside of the Israeli state, any formal investigation other than there's like a UN report, and the UN report includes some of that information. But what I'm saying is like it attributes all deaths on that day to Hamas, all of them, right? And like I actually pulled up just a little bit of detail from, and I can send y'all the link to the actual piece. But Asa Winstanley with Electronic Intifada has done some great work on this, and all he's doing is, you know, and so Ali Abunimah too with Electronic Intifada, and all they're really doing is looking at the Israeli media and like the discussions that like the defense minister Yoav Gallant and others are having in those spaces. And you know, like I don't have the number here, but anyways, if you just even look at the sheer volume of um like missiles, bombs, you know, gunfire, helicopter fire, etc., that happened on that day, and you don't attribute the deaths of any Israelis, even as there's admissions in multiple layers and multiple military people within Israeli society that they issued the Hannibal Directive, meaning that they were willing to take out hostages in order to prevent them from being taken back to Gaza, right? And so they were just like helicopter firing on cars that are trying to go back to Gaza. And in those cars are, of course, Hamas militants and other armed, you know, groups that were participating in October 7th. But there was also Israelis, right? And so all of those deaths are attributed in this report the same way that they usually are in the Western media, this number 1,200, which I think the actual number is like 1,100. But the point being that they weren't all killed by Hamas on that day, right? And so I'm not trying to make an argument that Hamas did not kill civilians or anything like that on that day. You know, you can get into discussions of within Israeli society, you know, you come upon a kibbutz, like people are armed in Israel too, right? And so, you know, if you come up on somebody who has a gun, are you going to like stand down or try to negotiate with that person, right? Or are you going to treat them like they are combatant? But just, I'm not trying to make an argument specifically about that. I'm just trying to say that there is no like, so there's no assessment of that. And so what that leaves is then on the one hand, this narrative, which is very interesting because in the two reports, in the anti-Israeli and anti-Semitism report, they just use this number, you know, Hamas killed 1,200 people on October 7th, you know, And in the other one, they don't actually reference that at all. They reference October 7th, but they don't actually go into any details of what happened. And I understand why, because there are like it's not definitive data. They're just sort of taking these numbers that the IOF or the IDF said, you know, early on. And all I'm saying is that a lot of the response that you see in the anti-Semitism report is based on an understanding that these folks had of what had happened on October 7th, including a lot of the atrocity propaganda that went along with it, like the ideas of the mass rapes and the babies being beheaded and all this kind of stuff that was promulgated that eventually was factually totally debunked, right? And they're all sort of basing their understanding on that narrative, whereas the folks who are, you know, I won't speak for, you know, I mean, Arab is a huge community, Muslim is a huge community. I think it's kind of weird that they lumped all these things together in the way that they did, but I don't deny, of course, that there would be bias against Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians. But, you know, from a Palestinian understanding, it's different. Like they, you know, they're like, look, these folks were in a concentration camp. They were in a prison. They broke out. They had military objectives. Like, were there excesses? Like, yeah, probably. Like, what is the, you know, but you know, so I just say that to say that that's an important thing too, because part of what happened is that the Jewish students went immediately into a state of mourning on October 7th and like fear, you know, whereas like for a lot of people, you know, it's very difficult again to say this, but we all know it. Like October 7th was exhilarating for a lot of people because they were like, this is a possibility of freedom, of liberation, of like fighting back. And, you know, and so that is those are totally different ways to approach this that lead to very different feelings for people. And then being upset at each other about how each other is feeling about that. So I guess one thing I would say is like, I can't imagine a college being very well equipped to deal with that, you know, disparity too, of just like, we don't even have a shared understanding of the events that happened or what led up to them.
Never been better to be in an HBCU where all you have to worry about are diaspora wars. It's no, I'm just playing. But so I didn't read past the executive summary. So either one of you, please, or anyone in the chat, let me know. So based on what you were just saying, Jared, at what point later on in these chapters do they detail the formula for assessing the response to those numbers? So like if I just grant the 1,200 number, so do they then say, well, based on if Hamas killed 1,200 Jews in this raid, then Israel gets to respond by killing 300,000, 200, 150,000? Is it 50,000 per? I mean, you know, it's so
Right.
like, because I didn't see any consideration of any of that okay, Hamas, Palestinians, all of them are all wrong all the time, forever, 100%. Fine. Therefore, what? So then we get to admit that we're just so therefore all of this is fine, and then what we do next is automatically fine. And I mean, that was the other part of this, that like these, and then you described it perfectly, that there is this fundamental contradiction. For some, Israel remains the font of freedom, democracy, and the hope of the West in that region of the world, and for others it is a perennial genocide. So I mean, what is the university supposed to do? What are the rest of us supposed to do? You know, but I don't think the answer is found in these reports. I'll say that.
No, not at all. And I mean,
Other than your
there's
point
no,
about they want to divest. They said
yeah,
they suggested divesting militarily. Yeah, maybe.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the difficult things. Like, that's the other part about the report that I wish, I think because the emphasis is on anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli bias, there's a lack of much in terms of voices from anti-Zionist Jews within the report. You know, many of whom obviously were participating in the encampments and the protests and so on, right? There's a little bit in terms of when anti-Zionist Jews felt that some of the things that were going on within the encampments or the protests crossed a line into something anti-Semitic, which again, like most of those were feelings, like, you know, a map is drawn of Palestine and it doesn't show clearly where Israel fits in this map, and so therefore this means that, do they want to genocide us, right? Like, so this kind of, again, hysteria that we have become accustomed to, I think it reminds me a lot of sort of white genocide thinking within the United States of like, you know, we're going to get to this level where there's 60% people of color and we will lose control of our white supremacist state. And so we have to fight back against this. But yeah, I mean, there is a little bit of that, but they don't balance it at all with anti-Zionist, you know, Jews within that report offering their feelings about what was going on or areas where they felt discriminated against for their views. I think you actually get a little bit of it in the Palestinian Arab and Muslim bias report, where you definitely see more.
There's a section where they quote some of the Jewish students and faculty members who do not support Israel and basically explain how uncomfortable they're made to feel because they're Jewish and they don't agree with genocide, which I thought was an interesting, you know, like it's just interesting. Yeah. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I just, you know.
No, I think that's a version of anti-Semitism as well, right? Like if an anti-Zionist Jew is not, if their perspective is not allowed to be a part of the discourse of what, you know, so-called Jews feel or Israelis feel, then like that is itself a form of anti-Semitism. And that's one of the forms that we see a lot, you know, where there's this hegemonic understanding of, you know, how the Jewish people feel and what their politics are, and that there's not space for, you know, dissenting views to be discussed kind of publicly within that. They're hidden a lot from the view, particularly within mainstream media, but also I'm sure within, you know, something like the Harvard administration as well. So yeah.
But I mean, again, that anti-Semitism report, to me, it pretty clearly says anti-Semitism is only when it's anti-Zionist. So other Jews suffering because they sided with the wrong team or whatever, that doesn't. They seem to be saying we don't count that. That's not our definition of anti-Semitism. And I know they attempt to challenge attempts to redefine anti-Semitism. So they're trying to bring it back to, you know, their core definition. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to share like a quick story because, you know, I'm not trying to make these equivalencies or anything like that, but I went to Ireland in 2003, and everywhere I went, every cab driver, every Irish, you know, as soon as they found out I was American, the first question they would ask me is, did you vote for George Bush? And the reason that they wanted to know that was because Bush was starting a war in Iraq at that time off of like very flimsy pretexts that everybody in the international community could see, that there were weapons of mass destruction and, you know, this and that. And so we needed a humanitarian intervention in Iraq. This was, of course, part of the war on terror, right? But they were also upset, of course, about the response in Afghanistan, but particularly in Iraq, because there was no connection, as people know, between, you know, Iraq and 9/11 at all. And I just say that to say, like, it is not unusual in a time of a war for people who oppose that war, including entire societies of people who oppose that war, because like Irish people were against it, you know, to say like, tell me your politics before I start talking to you. Like, And that's essentially, I would say, the largest argument. No, I did not vote for George Bush. I actually voted Green Party in that election. But yeah, it's not unusual, right, for people to do that. And actually, in the report, I thought one of the most telling moments in the anti-Semitism report, maybe I can find exactly what it was, but they said, when I went to they said Jewish students at Harvard right now are being treated the way Republicans were when I went to school. And I thought that was like a really, they made the oh, well, this is another community that we're struggling to serve here at Harvard, is the Republican community. But like, I thought that was a really interesting admission, right? Because what you're really talking about is that politically this is difficult, like, because the politics don't align with the mass feeling. One other thing I'll say quickly is that they did point out at some point in the report, when they're going through the data, that the amount of students who feel uncomfortable around someone who supports Zionism or who supports the state of Israel, right, is roughly equivalent to the general population, right? So I thought that was a good admission in that report, because basically they're saying that even if we define anti-Semitism in this way of opposing the state of Israel and opposing Zionism, like, it's the students are not more anti-Semitic than the general population on this issue. It's actually basically the same. And, because the argument is always that it's very different.
Right.
Renee, can I
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, can I respond to Alex, who's asking if I feel threatened when I see a Palestinian flag? So I do. And on the one hand, I am amazed that my co-panelists here didn't read carefully enough in the footnotes, because during a university campus visit a year or so ago, I answered one of these survey questions that was sent to the Jews on campus at Harvard. And in the footnotes, if you read deep enough, you'll see that Jared Ball co-signs all of this and felt threatened. So I only have these flags as attempts to overcome my trauma. And the keffiyeh hanging behind me and the poster it's just all so I can overcome that trauma and help other Jews heal. It's okay.
I can't stand you. Look, y'all, this is why we can't be bringing on like the good Jared too often, because he's gonna think we crazy.
Not at all. I love having these conversations with y'all. It's great.
So I will add another article that I'm writing for Public Square is actually about this bill that's been introduced in the New Jersey legislature, attempting to ensure that the definition of anti-Semitism is that based on the IHRA, their working definition. And so I've been doing some research and reading a lot, and discovering that, funny enough, the problem is not actually the IHRA's definition, because the actual working definition, I don't think, is incorrect. If you keep scrolling down, it's in like a blue box on that screen. I think it's pretty reasonable. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community, institutions, and religious facilities. So this is not like outrageous, right? And I think people should note very, very clearly that the word Israel and the word Zionism, like, they're nowhere in this definition, right?
Can I just ask, when they say non-Jewish individuals, do they mean that non-Jews might just get caught up in the violence by proximity, or are they saying that, are they acknowledging that Semites are also non-Jews?
It's a good question that I do not know the answer to.
I took it more as like you could think somebody was Jewish, right? Or you
Okay.
could,
Right.
and so you could still
Ah,
express anti-Semitism towards them, even though they might not be Jewish themselves.
gotcha.
Okay.
So if you scroll down just a little bit more so people can see the second, after it says to guide AHRA. So I think this next, oh, don't go too far. Don't go too far. All right. So I think this is, you got to go back up. You be scrolling so fast, man. So right there, stay right there. So they want to guide everybody in this, right? And so I think this is very, very interesting. Manifestations might include the targeting of the state of Israel, conceived as a Jewish collectivity. However, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country could not be regarded as anti-Semitic. And I don't know how many people have continued to read on this page to understand that there's some clarity that is here that gets muddied in an attempt to change what the actual definition is, right? Because, I mean, maybe it's just my understanding, but I feel like if any government of any country was trying to kill off another population of people, it would be criticized, right? Like, if any country or government was preventing aid, medicine, oil, water, like basic necessities from getting beyond a border, it would be criticized. If any country was just dropping bombs on families, sniping journalists, like I feel like it would be criticized, right? So even by what it says here, we should all be in the clear. Like I'm just saying, like common sense wise, right? But they've somehow managed to muddy it by just simply saying manifestations might include the targeting of the state of, that's how they make it muddy. Because when you start with that, everything that follows becomes up to interpretation, right? It's whether or not you think what the person said about Israel is actually like something they would critique about another country. Like it just becomes muddy. So, what, because throughout these both reports, they discuss that Harvard in 2023 implemented the definition from the IHRA, but they were very careful to say they were implementing the definition and examples. So this is how they get away with it. Because
Yeah, the
also
examples.
within the IHRA are the examples of people criticizing Israel. So
Yeah,
this is how they get away with it.
the examples are really where it gets problematic, and usually when it gets adopted into law or policy, the examples are included along with it, and so those become prohibited. And I mean, I could speak to the two that you probably have them ready, Renee, but the
No, no,
two
no.
that I
Go,
find
go,
most
go for it.
problematic. I mean, one is so one is there's a principle that says denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, for example, by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. Now, obviously, there's some nuance in how that is worded, right? But I think it's also like it's a little bit interesting of a thing, because I don't know that self-determination of a global population, ethnicity slash religion, um, that the idea that they should have a nation state. I mean, it's kind of similar to like the logic of Liberia as well, although obviously there are other African countries, but that like, you know, people who went through the slave trade needed a settler colonial nation state in Africa to be able to go back to, that then had to displace other Africans in order to, to create it. And even with like the United States, right? Like it's a settler colony. Like, is there a right to self-determination of the people who created the United States? Like, I don't. So I think I think that's a very problematic example or premise in itself, because certainly all people have a right to, safety, security, like political life, human rights, etc. But when you're talking about a diasporic kind of ethno-religious population that's all over the world, the notion that they all have to go back to this land that other people were already living on, I think is a deeply problematic idea. And, so that's one, obviously, that I think is a big issue. Another one is like just the, where was it? Maybe I think that's the key one for me. Because
That's
the
the
other
one that
ones,
stands out for me. The rest of them are
yeah,
all like, it's almost like it depends on what you say when you say it, right? Like
right.
a lot of things can be taken in multiple ways depending on how the person expresses the thing that they're trying to say, right? And I want people to understand that I'm not trying to lay claim that there was never any acts of anti-Semitism that happens in coordination with pro-Palestinian action, right? Like I'm sure there is. Like I'm not at all trying to be dismissive of it. But what I want people to really understand is for me in reading these two reports, it becomes very much a focus on like this idea that Harvard did not overextend itself to make sure that the Zionist students weren't made to feel uncomfortable while on campus due to the actions of people who didn't want genocide, right? And so a lot of, where I found, I think, the most value was reading like the quotes, right? The things that they quoted students as saying, that they, quoted faculty members as saying. And the reason that to me was of value is because there's such a staunch difference in what the quotes reveal about how these students and faculty members feel while they're going through these things. And I'll say it again, like if you're telling me that someone deciding that they don't really want to hang with you because they don't want to be around someone who doesn't think genocide is problematic, right? Like that was so painful for you that like, you had to file a report about it, that somebody didn't want to be your friend. I mean, fuck, like, didn't we learn in kindergarten, like everybody doesn't have to be your friend, right? But on the other side of it, that students who wrote to the administration because the result of their faces being on the side of the truck were phone calls, emails, and direct commentary threatening their lives, telling them that they should be sexually assaulted, demanding that, they leave campus and not participate in anything. Like the idea that these two things are in any way, shape, or form, like reasonably comparative, like you can't compare the two experiences in my opinion. And again, I recognize that people will think that's unfair, and I'm sorry that you do. I just don't care, right? Like, oh,
But
these
that's what
people
I
aren't being my friend, like I don't care.
but that's what I heard in the Salaita clip again, that this whole idea that people trying to defend or stop a genocide on the one hand, or assert the right to their own sovereignty, should have, in this context, should have to be worried about, is what I'm saying going to be made the equivalent to a Nazi in 20th century Germany? I mean, even in one of the reports, they said, well, we found the use of a flyer that had been used previously, once upon a time, in an anti-Semitic way, in a pro-Palestinian flyer. So here we go again. But as Salaita was saying, it's the same thing Black people have been saying here. White people call them, I mean, Black people call the white people devil or cracker. I mean, all right. But there's no, I mean,
Right.
there's no
And
state
even
supported
it's
power structure saying now go put these people on
right.
trees and do all this other stuff.
Right. And
Yeah.
there's some real, like, even if you look at, I mean, I couldn't get over it. Like, like in the anti-Semitism report, there's a picture of, and these things were not recent, right? Like they shared a lot of things that had nothing to do with the past 2 years, which I thought was was also very telling, right? But neither here nor there on that part. But they showed like a flyer that was posted on students' doors in 2013, and the flyer, I thought this was very clever, actually. It was basically like, you have to now pack up and leave your dorm room. We're taking over your dorm room, right? You can't live in here anymore. You have 3 days and you have to get out. And then it went on to say, this is what people are coming home to in the West Bank. And if we appreciate that you took the time to read this fake flyer, because now we want to invite you to participate in this conversation about what it is to live in a place where you are displaced simply because people decided that you haven't earned the right to live there anymore, right? And I was like, this was, I feel like, a really great way to kind of jar somebody, but try and attempt to pull them into the conversation. But this was used in the anti-Semitism report as evidence of like anti-Semitism. And I was like, what are we talking about right now, right? And when you think about all the ways in which there is no punishment response for Zionist students. They weren't being, not being able to graduate. They weren't getting suspended. They weren't getting arrested and thrown off campus. Like, they weren't, being told like their events can't move forward because people don't want to see these things here. They weren't, the faculty members who felt like they couldn't teach or speak or do anything because they were literally just afraid that people were going to look at them side eye. Right? Like, they didn't want side eye. Like, that's what this is. That's the whole report. They didn't want to get side eyed. And I'm like, what just happened? But I feel like there's value in understanding that, right? Like, there's value in a 300-page report that lets you know that what they're afraid of is getting a side eye. That's what they're afraid of. Nothing else. They're just afraid of getting a side eye.
Yeah, the other thing I thought was interesting too, we haven't talked about too much, is if you read again the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian bias report, you're looking at an incident where a lot of faculty are saying, I'm not going to get tenure because I have, Zionists, tenured faculty above that are reviewing or have attacked me or have, challenged me on accosted me at a conference, like these kinds of things, right? And you don't see any of that in the other report, in the anti-Semitism report, but what you do see is them going after certain departments and faculty, really, although they don't like name them, but they do. There's enough inference in there, and I'm sure this is something administration knows, and there's probably other discussion that's happening around this. They're coming after anti-Zionists faculty and faculty that have taught the history of Palestine from what that report says is a very biased perspective. And look, I just have a really hard time believing that at Harvard that you have like some overwhelmingly like revolutionary pro-Palestinian education going on. Like at Harvard, we're training the next Secretary of State and, defense. Larry Summers was the former president, and he's in here like stoking the like, this is anti-Semitic stuff. And so that was really interesting. And also, like Claudine Gay in this report looks terrible because it looks like she does extend herself to try to make the Jewish students and the Israeli students feel that, like, that is very clear that she takes all these steps to make them feel comfortable, or that the university cares about what's happened to them and is thinking with their community. She goes to dinners with them and events and all this stuff. And on the flip side, you have these instances where like Muslim students or these groups of students that are in that, that report are saying, we met with her. She finally met with us, and we cried about our family members being killed. Literally, this is the kind of stuff that they're talking about. And they're like, she didn't care and she just left. Like, and it's like,
Right.
Like,
You know, I have to say there is somewhere, Jared, in the anti-Semitism report, somewhere obviously within the intro and executive summary, where because I almost fell over because they do say there is a claim that Jews are being hurt in the job market. Israeli defenders of Israel are being hurt in the job market, and I don't know to what extent they go back to it, but I was just like, you can't be serious.
Yeah, first of all, that's ridiculous. But second of all, what I would say is that in the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian bias report, they specifically have a person who works in the career services office who says employers are calling us and telling us don't send us any resumes by anyone who is in the encampments, anybody who supported Palestine. We don't want any of those people, right? And so it's like the levels of, like, even if, you know, some people, again, I feel like the anti-Semitism report is largely based on feelings. There are a couple of incidents it talks about, like there are things where, you know, but even those incidents, there's only one. I think there's one where they talk about somebody being like physically removed from a space and then like suing people for assault, basically, right? And, you know, it sounds like this is, I think they even admit in the report it was like a Zionist person who was like kind of trying to agitate and was like being filmed and all this stuff. But you know, the incidences of actual material harm are so vast in what's going on in, you know, the report about Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians, and not at all in the other one.
Because there's also a statement by a faculty member who was told, like, if we see anything that you write that indicates that you are in support of Palestine, we will take that as your resignation. Like, that's what they were told. Right? So, like, I just can't, like, it's just right. Like, to me, that's where that's literally where I'm stuck, and where I feel like, for as much as I don't think anything can really come out of these, because I think Harvard set its path a really long time ago, right? Like you both said, like, it made a decision about who it's going to support, you know, based on where the donations come, based on where their research monies comes from. Like, they made a very clear decision on how they were going to move forward as an institution that they really can't back off from now, right? Like, the ship has sailed, in my opinion. And I will admit, curious, like, what I wonder what the intention was. Like, I don't know, did they think like the report was going to come out and that it was going to show that things were so bad for the Jewish students that Harvard was right to behave as it did? Or, you know, is there a possibility that, like, they see the tables are turning just a little bit, so they need kind of a window to be able to say, like, we're going to try and do something different? Like, it's very curious to me, like, what exactly the purpose was of these reports. Because, again, like you said, like, you invest all this time and energy into writing these reports and recommendations and and, like, what exactly is going to come from it in the end that's going to be of any use, you know, any real impact for the people who are feeling actual harm? Because I just feel like the students who were doxxed, and the students who were attacked, and the students who did not get their diplomas, the students who were suspended, like, I just, they've been unheard this entire time, in my opinion, right? And so here's this report now that shows, like, this stuff was also happening. None of you paid attention. But I wonder what really is going to come from that. Because even in reading, like, I decided to skim some of the headlines about these reports in the Israeli papers. And all they talk about is how almost 40% of students at Harvard feel unsafe, right? Like, they just missed that almost 90% of the Muslim students feel unsafe. Like, it's just not missed it. Obviously, it's intentional.
You keep bringing up that irrelevant shit, though.
I know. I know.
Palestinian student. Well, just quickly, I did see that the Chronicle of Higher Education had covered the recent hearings, the recent hearings in Congress about what universities are doing, and all these universities are now showing up to basically say we're being transparent and accountable. We're not going to go the way that Harvard and Penn or whoever went. So this could be a way of Harvard trying to. I don't think they were directly testifying this time, but I think that they could be maybe trying to head off some of the coming criticism around, again, transparency. They can say we're being transparent and accountable. We're addressing everything. We did the real report we know you want, and then we did this fake thing. We had to do, but we're just being. You could throw that away, and then leave us alone. Don't come after any more of our budget, and let's get back in the good graces.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of kind of CYA stuff, but I also think it's there's probably aspects of this that were mandated. I mean, I think that just related. I mean, I know that there's the people who are like, Harvard is the anti-Trump. Like, I can't even get into that kind of stuff. But the point being that even under Biden, right? Like, they still, when you get a high volume of complaints, and actually this may not be as much of an issue because I think Trump is gutting the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education, but it legally you're supposed to do investigations, you're supposed to gather information, and my guess is because of the volume of the complaints that were happening at the time, that they had to produce some kind of, or they at least felt that they had to produce some kind of comprehensive report, and to address, as you said, like these kind of allegations both from the government and in mainstream media that there's this huge anti-Semitism problem on college campuses, which is the way that it's been narrated, particularly in the media. And so they probably did it, just for kind of transparency, but also to in some ways maybe to contextualize and demystify some of that. There are some real problems also with that report and how it deals with the Palestinian movement. Like, one of the things I would say is that, it lays out that long history. And that part is probably the most interesting part of the report to read. I mean, in the 80s, Harvard was having PLO folks come to the campus to give talks, along with, of course, like really, ridiculous Zionist people as well. But there was, I was trying to think, like, could you imagine if they brought like a Hamas representative to campus? Like, they would never do that nowadays, right? And so in many ways, what I would say is also historically, interestingly enough, Harvard took more seriously, I think, bringing people who are representatives of the Palestinian issue to campus to be able to present their side of the argument. And it's moved more towards academics as opposed to people who are actually involved in, militant struggle, etc. But the thing it narrates, right, is that as there was all these dialogue initiatives, all these attempts at like interfaith dialogue, Jewish and Muslim, Arab and, Palestinian and Israeli, like there was a lot of effort around this, which makes a lot of sense for a place like Harvard, because you're trying to create the next generation of diplomats, of politicians, etc., right? And that as this is all going on, Palestinians are losing more and more of their land, right? And so it's like, that's not really dealt with in the report. That they do talk about how, as the prospects of peace faded away, right? So what they're talking about mainly there is Oslo, right? But after it became quite clear that Oslo was a sham and that the Palestinians were not going to get a state out of the Oslo Accords, and that, there's the elections, Hamas gets elected in Gaza and they get cut off, they get put under siege, etc., right? Like, as all that happens, that the Palestinian situation, like, I think there comes a time at which Palestinians say, okay, enough of this dialogue. Like, we need divestment. We need you to take material steps to help us out in our struggle, and this is what you can do. And we don't want to hear that other stuff anymore, because we've been doing it for 40 years. And as we've been doing it, you've been taking more and more of our land. And it kind of, I mean, again, to make the comparison of the US and Native Americans, I mean, it's similar, right? It's like treaties and like agreements and, but at the same time, it's like you're getting pushed into smaller and smaller pockets of territory, reservations, etc. And so I just think that is kind of missed in the discussion. It's sort of alluded to, but that what Harvard is bemoaning as an institution, they have this idea of pluralism, which is like, they describe it as like deeper than diversity. Like, we really want to understand each other. We can disagree, but we need deep understanding of each other. And they're bemoaning that, basically that most of the students these days don't understand the Israelis because they don't talk to them enough and they don't learn.
But that's what I was saying was crazy. On the one hand, you acknowledge that, again, since the 60s, Jews, Israelis, pro all of that sentiment has been on an ever increase at Harvard. And again, without falling into stereotype, the idea that Jews and pro-Zionist sentiment has struggled to thrive at Harvard in the last 40, 50 years is silly. So if there's been a paucity of honest discussion about the Middle East over the last X, Y, how are you blaming Hamas? How are you blaming the Palestinians for what's going on at Harvard? When the hell have they had any influence?
Right. And
it's such a bullshit. Yeah,
it's crazy. Yeah. And Jared, I have a note about this, because the other thing that really bothered me was in the anti-Semitism report, it was like this overarching idea that what Israel is doing is okay, right? Like this idea that it's okay to wage a genocide, and it's okay to steal the land, and it's okay to starve the people. Like, why are you all upset with Israel? Like, I don't understand why you all aren't like trying to understand what we want. Like, I really like.
Yeah, I mean, just to say quickly to underscore that point, Renee, because you're absolutely right. It's like they say something along the lines, it's not a quote, it's sort of paraphrasing, but at some point they say something along the lines of, these students haven't taken enough time to understand the things that Palestinians have done that would make Israelis do this in response. That's basic. There's something very close in wording to what I just said. It's not exactly that, but which is like, I mean, what a painful thing. And I have to say too, again, with the US and 9/11, I think you have a kind of similar thing there, where it's like the response, like, we don't talk enough in this country about how outsized and unhinged the US response to 9/11 was. No matter how bad, how awful. And my brother was living in New York City and working blocks away from the World Trade Center then. So it's not like I don't have any like personal trauma or fear or whatever associated with that event. But like, the notion that what the United States did in response was somehow like proportional or deserved or made any kind of like logical sense is just wacky, right? And so I'd say there's a really dangerous thing about like 9/11 that way, the way Israel's responded to October 7th, potentially some of the stuff that's going on with India right now, and the way that it's, saber rattling with Pakistan and India, Kashmir, like this idea that because some incident happens and there's a loss of life, that this allows this like hugely disproportional response, and that's something we have to understand.
Right. It's something we have to struggle
really
with.
disturbing.
And it is. And I also feel like none of the work that the Hillel on Harvard's campus is doing has stopped. right? So there's also within the report this idea that like, oh, well, we have to expand our abilities to learn and all these things. Well, expand it from what? You like you're already able to do whatever the fuck you want. Like what like, what are we expanding exactly? It's
What's
none
the Palestinian equivalent to B'nai B'rith again?
of
What? I know it's there.
I mean, it's why and then they throw out these little things, you know, and I made mention, I sent you all the link to like a very brief explanation of what happened in Crown Heights in 1991, right? And because they kind of threw that out there as like a comparison to like when things happen nationally, like how it impacts the campus. Now I grew up in Brooklyn, right? And I lived in Flatbush in 1991. And, you know, I used to go to Crown Heights a lot because my grandfather lived in Crown Heights in 1991. And so I remember very clearly. So this throwing it out there like the riots of Crown Heights, as if a little Black child wasn't killed because of the blatant disregard that was shown by the driver who was Jewish, right? And that
Can you tell the story real quick for
okay.
folks who aren't familiar with that? Yeah,
sure.
thanks.
That's fair. So there was an incident in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, and no one fully understands how it is that the Jewish driver was on the sidewalk to run over a little Black child. I believe the little girl, I think it was a little girl, was 10 years old, and struck the child, killed the child. When the ambulance arrived, it was from the Jewish hospital. They were so busy making sure that the driver was okay that they gave no real help to the child. The child subsequently passed away from the injuries. The driver was allowed to leave. And there was, you know, a follow-up of obviously like a uprising in Crown Heights at the time. There was a Jewish man who was stabbed and killed during what happened. And then this resulted in like this huge, this almost idea that like, oh, the Blacks went crazy, right? Like the Blacks went crazy. And no one identified the fact that the driver, who was the initiator of all these things, never had any consequence. There was no consequence. And even when, if I remember correctly, they arrested him after a while, and the Jewish people stormed the police department to get him out, right? Like no one talks about that part. And so, you know, like it got thrown in as like this attempt to say like, you know, look, these things happen all the time where these anti-Semitic, and I'm like, but look at what occurred, right? And the person who was eventually tried for the stabbing of the Jewish man, and now I'm trying to I can't remember if he actually died or not. Because the person who did it and went to jail only went to jail for 10 years, which makes me think that like maybe it wasn't death, right? I can't. I apologize, y'all. And I just read the story, so you would think I would remember it completely, but you know, it's like this throwing in of this event, right, and trying to equate it as like evidence of these anti-Semitic things that are happening. And Franny, you might be right. It might have been a little boy. I'm sorry. There's so much in my brain right now.
Yeah, but I think just quickly one point to emphasize is that it was raised in this report. It's like it's a dog whistle again. It's meant to inflame people's memories going back to because again, just like now, there was no or very little discussion then of the pre-existing relationship between the Black community and Jews,
and
or how it got
and how
to
the
be
Black
that
people
way.
were getting pushed out of Crown Heights. You know, there was a big struggle about the Caribbean parade.
Why they so
that happened,
mad for it?
right?
Yep.
I mean, there was so many things that were happening at the time, and it all gets disregarded as usual in an effort to support why like we can't question people when they're doing shit that's just racist, right? Like if you are walking around campus and you are in support of a group that is committing a genocide, you should get the fucking side eye. Like, I'm sorry, right? Like like not wanting genocide, in my opinion, is a very low bar of humanity. It is a low fucking bar. It's not asking a lot to say to somebody, you should not support genocide, right? Like, period. And so I don't want to have it, it's infuriating. And then you see in the anti-Muslim report, like these things where they're like, you know, telling students like, we equate the river to the sea to like the Confederate monuments, right? Like, what the fuck are we talking about right now? Are we serious?
But you're not protesting the Confederate monuments. You're not leading a charge against. You're not making that link in your day-to-day or any part of your whatever.
Right.
So yeah,
and I thought it was interesting also that in the anti-Semitism report, there was a golden age of being Jewish. I don't know if you caught that. There was a golden age talked about, like, where it was so beautiful to be a Jewish person on Harvard's campus. That did not exist for the Muslim and Palestinian students, right? There was no golden age.
And then BDS
right?
ruined it.
Right. And then there's a really extended conversation about what happened after 9/11 on Harvard's campus and the impact of 9/11 on the students. And that for the report, and I thought this was a really interesting point that they made, that what is happening right now is an extension and continuation of what started after 9/11, right? And so you have like these 10 years since 20 years since 9/11 happened, right? And since then, it's just been this ongoing growth of anti-Muslim imbalance, right? Like it was a very
interesting. This is the 9/11 you're talking about. Nixon signed legislation in 1970, increased air marshals on U.S. bound flights in response to 4 airliners being hijacked. That's interesting.
At one point, to kind of on the same topic of Black and Jewish relations, or whatever we want to call this, like they do make when you get to the data section, this is one of the arguments that they make too, is that, they do say that the most anti-Semitic people are white people on the far right. They do actually admit that, which is good. But Black students are one of the highest groups that they identify, right? And then they do talk about examples like you talked about, Renee, but yeah, it's always decontextualized. It's like, Minister Farrakhan's rhetoric, or like, whatever. It's never and one of the incidents that's really interesting is, I think it was like the Afro-Asian Afro-Palestinian Solidarity Group, something like this, I guess, shared a picture that was from SNCC, that was from, I think, 67 or 68, when they did their essay or their piece that basically ended up getting the whole organization taken out by Zionists, pulling money out and, going after them. They took a stand, post 67, that was like a pro-Palestinian stance. And in it, there's like a cartoon that's drawn. And again, like, this is the thing, and this is like, the other point I wanted to say that I forgot about the IHRA definition is, the other thing it says is you can't do anything that depicts or equates actions of the state of Israel to actions of the Nazis, right? Like, so this is another thing that they say. And I understand why they have that in there. It's the Holocaust remembrance. Like the people who are making this policy are really centrally focused on the Holocaust and on the Nazis. And they want to say, like, look, this is off limits. All right. But I think it's like, for people who make those comparisons, it is based upon the actions that they see, right? It is based upon seeing children burn alive in tents, and like, and so but that piece on the 60, on the SNCC cartoon, I thought was interesting, because they framed it as this was something that was understood as anti-Semitic at the time. And it's like, that is a matter of opinion. SNCC didn't think it was anti-Semitic. Other people didn't necessarily think it was anti-Semitic. It's a drawing. These drawings, it can be, it shows a hand with the Star of David like carved in it, basically. But like, the argument that SNCC was working to elaborate at that time, which not a lot of people were doing yet, was about, Israel as this settler colonial entity, expansionist entity in the region. And you know, they were in the minority within, and the funny thing is the people that they cite as having turned against them, one of them was Bayard Rustin, and one of them, I can't remember who the other one was. Maybe I can pull it up in the report. But you know, they're citing people who were Zionists, that even though they were African American, they were Black, like, but those are the people that they go to as turning against some SNCC to say, this is the evidence. Here are other Black people saying this is anti-Semitic, and therefore it was, right. And so they went after these students for resharing the same cartoon in the midst of the genocide, right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. And we're about to run out of time. Not that we're on like a time schedule, but we try not to go too far beyond our 2 hours. So we may have to circle back to this, because we didn't even get to the Jewish alumni who is suing Harvard, and who apparently is at the core of all the Republican efforts against Harvard, who is like, you know, traveling and meeting with Trump and taking pictures with Marco Rubio, and like, right. And this is the Jewish student who is suing Harvard because they failed to address the anti-Semitism on campus. But he is it all appears to me to be like an effort of the Republican Party. Like he's super thrilled to be aligned with Trump and the Republicans, and you know, and in support of them, you know, doing whatever they want to do, you know, in an attempt to quote unquote punish Harvard for not being hard enough, you know, not taking a hard enough stance on anti-Semitism. But I do agree. One of the things that both reports said that I agree with, and I just don't think Harvard will do it in a way that is logical at all, is there needs to be some clear definitions. The problem is the definition that they want to use is not a good one, right? But I do agree that part of the issue is this murkiness in what people understand anti-Semitism to be, and what people understand being Muslim to be, and what people understand happened in Palestine. There is no real education. And so, you know, they also bring this up in both reports, that there has to be like some real focus on attempting to teach the history, on attempting to, you know, provide opportunities for people to understand what's happening. The problem is if you're an institution that supports the Israeli side of this conflict, if you want to call it a conflict, right? Like, what kind of
your
lessons are you
Harvard
going to provide?
University with a $50 billion endowment, you would think that if they really wanted to have a conversation or do a study, do some research,
they could do it. Right. And that to me at the core is the real problem. Is, you know, there's so much energy and time being spent, you know, telling people, you know, dragging people off of streets and shutting down protests, and telling people, well, you should be able to protest only in certain spaces, and if you're not going to disrupt classes, and if you're not going to block entryways, and blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, all this stuff. And no one is really at all, none of these powers that be, and not that they care, but no one's just simply saying like, well, why are we okay with genocide? Like, like, how do we get here as like a space of human beings? Like, why are we okay with this? And how did we get to a place where like we're gonna just quietly like support this thing that is killing off a population of people? Because I can't get past that part, right? And I'm not gonna be cool with somebody who can't get past that part. And I'm also gonna side eye you if you're okay with that part. Like, can we just get past that really fucking low bar of don't support genocide? That's what I like. Can we just get can we get to that really low bar and then see what happens?
Yeah, go ahead, Jared. Yeah.
I kind of forgot what I was going to say, but I agree with what you're saying, Renee. You know, I totally do.
Well, I put the link to the particular video where you all are interviewing, you're doing the interview with Stephen Salaita. So people, if they aren't already, can use that to find their way to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, subscribe and support that platform. Definitely look forward to continuing this and other conversations with the both of you. And please, everybody, I think almost all of the links, I think I did pretty good this week of getting them all in the show description even before the show ended. So
there you go, Jared, on it. And I have to go check. I have to go check the voting results. I've been talking since the vote closed.
So right, so platform logo on the way. So that means well, for me selfishly, it means a new set of t-shirts to add to the rotation.
There we go.
And yeah.
And Jared, I really thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Welcome. I've been great. Anytime, Renee. Anytime. Anytime.
I love that I got to send a text that said Jared's. That was like the highlight, Jared's. So I appreciate Jared for coming on. Thank you so much for making the time on a random Saturday, and let's make sure we have you back soon to talk about whatever.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. I need to have you both back on our platform soon as well too. But I really, I love these. This is a great show you two have created here, and great channel. Shout out to Black Liberation Media, and yeah, thank you both.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So one more time on our way out, folks, if you are not already a patron, this is a really good time as usual to join, because we have the review crew segment coming up on Sinners, May 14th at 2 p.m. And then other offerings will be on the way as well there too. So please do sign up, support that. Please support all that has been going on here. Make sure the bell is rung so you don't miss things coming up on the platform. Thanks again to you both. Peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. And see you next week with more Saturday with Renee.